Shooting the lightest weight .357 Magnum revolver in the world. A little bit like drinking my Uncle Eric's moonshine. It's a whole lot of fun, but it kicks like a bitch and it will f you up. Hey everyone, it's James Reeves with TFBTV talking to you today about carrying the Smith & Wesson 340 PD, the lightest weight .357 Magnum revolver in the world. This is a 5-shot J-frame made by Smith & Wesson that weighs only 11.8 ounces. To put that into context, this is a .357 Magnum, and it's lighter than the Smith & Wesson Airweight series of revolvers that use an aluminum frame and a steel cylinder. That is like the 637, 638, and 642 series and so on. Those revolvers are .38 specials. This 340 PD is a full house .357 Magnum that weighs less than a Miller Lite. There's roughly 7 or 8 models of .357 Magnum J-frames with sub 2-inch barrels in the Smith & Wesson family of revolvers, and this one is by far the lightest .357 Magnum. To give you another frame of reference, the Smith & Wesson 340 PD weighs about half as much as the Smith & Wesson Model 640 that was introduced in 1990 with an all-steel frame and an all-steel cylinder. That gun has a similar silhouette to the 340 PD, but because of its all-steel design, it weighs 22 ounces versus the 11 ounces for the 340 PD. How does the 340 PD accomplish this ultra lightweight? Well, by use of exotic materials primarily. It uses a scandium alloy frame. What is scandium? I don't know either. I thought it was something from Lord of the Rings or perhaps the moon, but I did a little bit of research on it and it turns out that this is something used in like mountain bike frames and things like that. This fluted titanium cylinder weighs about half of a comparable stainless steel cylinder. Well, I think it's really neat that Smith & Wesson basically made the lightest .357 Magnum revolver in the world using technology and these high-tech materials. You pay for these exotic materials in 2 ways. First of all, there's an interesting little warning here on the underlug saying no less than 120 grain bullet. That's because .357 Magnum rounds using 120 grain or less, those tend to have more unburned powder and that can prematurely wear away at this titanium cylinder. So Smith & Wesson tells you to use a 120 grain or bigger bullet. That's not a big issue because most of you out there are going to be using something like in the 125 to 158 grain range for .357 Magnum personal defense. You also pay for it with money. Yeah, actual money. You pay for it with money because it's super damn expensive. Like a Smith & Wesson 642, a little J-frame 38 will set you back like $300. This bad boy will set you back nearly $1,100. May as well be made out of gold, but then it would be a lot heavier and not look as cool. So let's talk about the specs, then we'll get into my opinion of the gun. The Smith & Wesson 340 PD is a 5-shot 38 Special Plus P or .357 Magnum revolver. It's got an overall length of 6.3 inches, a height of 4.25 inches, and a double action trigger pull of about 12 pounds. Again, it's double action only because it's hammerless. Now, not having a hammer means that you're not going to have, say, a hammer spur to snag on a pocket whenever you're drawing this gun. But the drawback is you're stuck with an extremely heavy double action trigger pull. Some people prefer this because they see it as an additional safety on a gun that lacks a manual safety. Finally, the 340 PD I'm reviewing comes with a high-vis fiber optic green front sight. Pretty sure high-vis stands for high visibility, in which case they're not misleading you because damn, this thing is bright as a flare. Fit and finish on this gun, as usual, is impeccable. When you think of revolvers, you think of Smith & Wesson. There's a reason why. They know how to make a damn wheel gun. You get what you pay for, which is nice considering you have to shell out a lot of money for the 340 PD. Smith & Wesson has one of the best cylinder releases in the game, very intuitive to use, very easy to get to, and it's got aggressive checkering. All you do is push it forward, and then you can swing this cylinder easily out. Once you're done gassing this thing up, the cylinder clicks affirmatively back into place. I'm not a huge fan of the rubber grips on the Smith & Wesson, the little J-frame guns. I do like the composite rubber, but I feel like they could do something like, say, Ruger does with the LCR series, where it's a little bit softer rubber, especially if you're shooting a .357 Magnum. Yes, it's kind of a puss complaint that I'm making, but you know, I think Ruger just has a better grip. Now, some people do prefer the Smith & Wessons because the Ruger rubber tends to be a little bit tackier, and that means that your clothes can ride up on you or that the grip can get actually stuck in a t-shirt. And I gotta tell you, this gun is light. You pick it up and it's one of those things where it almost throws you off. It feels like they took a Smith & Wesson J-frame revolver and filled it with helium. It prepares you for the sticker shock. You know whenever you handle one of these things and then you ask the guy on the other side of the gun counter, how much does this cost? You're not gonna be surprised when he comes back at you with street price. I'm seeing around like, I wanna say 900 bucks. So no surprises, it's a good looking gun that handles well, but really the question is, how does it shoot? Do you have to be a literal masochist? Do you have to hate yourself to shoot the 340 PD, especially with full house 357 Magnum?
Smith & Wesson 340 PD, doing a little Russian roulette. We've got 4 38 special rounds in here and 1 357 Magnum. It's going to be not pleasant. Okay. Woo! I think I broke my hand. Whew. God damn. I mean, it's still usable, right? I mean, it isn't like pleasant. It isn't exactly what I'd be bringing to the range, shoot 357 every time I take this little guy out. But, I mean, it's serviceable. It isn't, I thought it was gonna go flying out of my hands because again, this thing only weighs 11 ounces. But you know when that 357's hitting. You know it, boy do you ever. But it works fine with 38. And if you want to jam this thing up with full house 357 big dog mag, you can make it work. It's serviceable. I'd carry it that way. In fact, if you're going to buy this gun and it's a 357 Magnum, I guess if you're going to carry it, you may as well just jam the thing up. But if you're giving it to your wife or your sister or your grandpa, whatever, you want to jam it up with 38, that works too.
Here's how I'd summarize it. 38 Special feels like 38 Special out of any other lightweight revolver. 357 Magnum, a little bit different story. This gun becomes a different animal, a wild bucking bronco, if you will. Now, I read a few reviews about the 340 PD before I determined whether or not I wanted to review it, and I think there was a line that stuck with me from one of the reviews where they described 357 mag recoil as stout but tolerable. That's how I would describe it.
Four and 5. That sucks. Ooh. That is unpleasant. Oh man. It still works though. I mean, you can still hit, this is like 12-inch silhouette target at 10 yards. I mean, any asshole can hit that, but still it's nice to know that you could put one straight in somebody's breadbasket under a degree of pressure with 357 Magnum at this distance. I mean, that is about that size, torso size right there. So good to go with the 357. Not fun, wouldn't want to do it. Fortunately, I don't have to shoot people every day, so, but if you ever did, you could.
When I think of recoil that is borderline intolerable, I think about like 44 Magnum, heavy grain 44 Magnum rounds out of like a titanium revolver. I think, believe it or not, I shot a Taurus revolver once. It was one of the titanium ones, ultra lightweight, shot 44 Magnum out of it. One of the worst days I've ever had in the range in my entire life. This isn't like that. It's actually a little bit of fun, especially when it starts spitting fire, but it is tolerable.
We're gonna start out with 38s. I've got 5 38s, and because I'm a masochist and because I love you guys, I'm gonna do 357s. 4, 5, 357 mags. This is gonna suck. Lightest production 357 revolver out there. If I break a bone, if I break my wrists, I'm doing it because I love you. Let's give it a shot.
you could actually rest assured that this gun would probably cause more damage to the person on the other side of the barrel than the person behind it. I'm not going to say that this thing is accurate. I was having a tough time hitting a 12-inch silhouette target at 10 yards. That was rapid fire, you know, shooting a course or whatever. If you take your time, if you stage the trigger, you can actually shoot this thing accurately enough. Under pressure, it'll work. You're not buying this teensy little gun. It's so cute, isn't it? You're not buying this thing to take to the range or to shoot like steel plate matches with. You're getting this gun because you want something ultra light that you can just stuff into a pocket and retrieve quickly without worrying about having to snag it. But you also want to have some power. Reloading is kind of a bitch on this thing. It doesn't have chamfering or beveling on the charge holes in the cylinder, especially with this tiny cylinder that rides so close to the frame. It's a bit of a struggle to load and unload this thing rapidly. So the thing is, whatever problem you have, I hope it can be solved with 5 shots of 357 Magnum.
The cylinder is so small that it takes a lot of work. God, didn't shoot that worth shit. This cylinder is so tiny that it's like trying to jam this thing up, especially whenever you're like under pressure. It's like, man, that would suck. I mean, look at that. Not a lot of room to work there. Kind of like that little thing you had when you were a kid that had the little shapes in it, and you had to kind of get the right shape and put it in the right hole. It's like that, except like doing it when you're drunk.
If that's important to you, having a quick reload, as it should be, I would suggest Bianchi speed strips if you want to stuff something in your pocket. If you decide that you just want to have 5 loose rounds of 357 Magnum in your pocket and you have to reload this thing after you just fired it at somebody who presumably is now firing back or about to fire back at you, you're gonna have a bad time. The ejector rod is also pretty short too, so you don't get a whole lot of help in trying to get those 357 Magnum rounds, the casings, completely clear of the cylinder. In fact, if I were carrying this on a regular basis, I'd probably get 357 Magnum personal defense hollow points that use like a nickel casing. So they're going to be a little bit more slippery, and you're not going to have to worry about them getting stuck in this titanium cylinder. I experienced no crimp jump or bullet jump. That is where the bullet works loose from the mouth of the casing whenever you're shooting a revolver that has especially husky recoil. I didn't experience that at all on the range with the 340 PD. And while I love the high-vis sights, these work really well. They really stand out. And it's a relatively precise sight. Again, this monstrous 12-pound trigger pull, which is smooth. It's just like any other 357 Magnum J frame that you've ever shot from Smith & Wesson. It's not tuned, so it isn't excellent, right? It's workable. But when you couple that with that 357 Magnum pop, this thing is certainly going to be less accurate than, say, a 9mm auto loader. And while we're talking about 9mm auto loaders, I know people out there are wondering right now, James, why would I want to carry this instead of, say, a Glock 43, like a lightweight, slim, single-stack 9mm auto loader? And I say, that's a great question. Me personally, I would prefer something like a Glock 43 to the Smith & Wesson 340 PD. Not only does it cost half as much, but you get a couple of extra rounds. You get 7 versus 5. And I feel like the Glock 43 is going to be a little bit more accurate and definitely more tolerable on the recoil side. But that said, I will, just for fun, make an argument as to why I think you should carry the Smith & Wesson 340 PD. Obviously, this is a revolver. A revolver means it's going to be dead nuts reliable. Many consider something like this, a J-frame, to be the ultimate for reliability. Kind of a weird flex, but you can shoot this thing from inside a jacket pocket. Believe it or not, I did a video on that like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm also worried about this thing catching on fire, legitimately. I don't know what this shitty jacket's made out of, but I hope it doesn't go up in flames. You guys would love that, wouldn't you? It'd be hysterical for you. All right, here goes nothing. And I managed to dump a revolver from my pocket actually pretty accurately. We're talking at like 3 yards, but I still put 5 rounds into like a fist-sized group, shooting from a jacket pocket with a revolver inside of it. For obvious reasons, that wouldn't work with a semi-auto, and it didn't work with a semi-auto when I tried it. But let me make the argument for efficiency. The Smith & Wesson 340 PD, again, weighs 11.8 ounces and it holds 5 rounds. That's 0.42 rounds per ounce of weight. The Glock 43, on the other hand, weighs 18 ounces, and while it holds 7 rounds, you're getting 0.39 rounds per ounce. So in terms of overall weight, this gun is like almost half a pound lighter. Believe it or not, if you can imagine that, this gun's almost half a pound lighter than the Glock 43, and you're giving up 2 rounds of capacity. But what about power? 357 versus 9mm. The Glock 43 will push 124 grain plus P spear gold dots at 1150 feet per second. That's 364 foot-pounds of energy. If you're holding 7 rounds, you multiply that 364 by 7 and you get 2,548 total foot-pounds. That's how much energy is contained in a Glock 43 with a full magazine and one in the chamber. Now, when you divide that by ounces, you get 141.5 foot-pounds of energy per ounce in the Glock 43 with 9mm. Many of you out there may be surprised to find out that a 9mm round coming out of a Glock 43 actually rivals the power of a 357 Magnum coming out of a snub-nose revolver, but it is true. The 340 PD can shove a 158 grain round at 1,015 feet per second. So that's 361 foot-pounds. And that's actually less energy than the 124 grain plus P spear gold dots out of the Glock 43. But you multiply that by 5 and you get 1,805 total foot-pounds of energy in the 340 PD, coming out to 153 foot-pounds per ounce. So you get around 10% more energy per ounce with the 340 PD. Essentially, the argument I'm trying to make here is if you look at this gun purely from an efficiency standpoint, it's actually a very efficient gun because it's so lightweight, it carries a lot of rounds per ounce, and when you couple 357 Magnum with that lightweight, you get a pretty high foot-pounds per ounce ratio, FLO, as I like to call it, the Flow-Rida quotient. The Smith & Wesson 340 PD is well made, it's lightweight, it's efficient, and you know it's going to be reliable. So what are the negatives? This gun is a brutal gun. The 12-pound double-action only trigger pull, while good in relation to other small-frame revolver double-action only triggers, is brutal. The price at $1,000, brutal. The recoil, 38, not so bad, but 357 Magnum, brutal. I mean, it's not that brutal. Like I said, it's tolerable, but I just wanted to kind of have a theme, you know, and like say brutal 3 times in a row. You know what I'm saying.
God. Wowza.
As an autoloader guy, because this gun is so lightweight, knowing that you'll have 357 Magnum, that it's going to be utterly reliable, this is a great, like, stuff it in your pocket gun, or if you got to go to the bodega to pick up a 6-pack, you can just jam it in like your jogging shorts, run down there, and you won't even notice that this thing is there with 5 rounds of 357 Magnum. Obviously, if you are a revolver guy, then the 340 PD should pique your interest for all the reasons that I mentioned in the video. Anyways, guys, that's it for me today and the 340 PD. We're out of here. Take care.